My name is Nick, 27M, and up until a week ago, I thought I had a pretty solid life. My wife, Michelle, 26F, and I met 5 years ago at a wedding. She was this radiant, captivating woman who instantly caught my attention. We were seated at the same table, thanks to some matchmaking antics from the bride and groom. Felt like fate. We clicked that night, talked about everything from childhood dreams to our favorite TV shows, danced until our feet hurt, and shared a kiss under the dim glow of the dance floor lights. It was like something out of a romantic movie. I didn't even ask for her number. It just felt too surreal. But a week later, she texted me, thanks to the bride passing along my number. We started dating, and everything felt right. Michelle was charming, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in me. Sure, we had small arguments like any couple, but nothing major. 2 years in, I proposed. She said yes, and we had a beautiful wedding less than a year later. For the most part, our marriage felt great. Or at least it did in the beginning. Fast forward to now. Our first wedding anniversary is just around the corner, but everything has fallen apart. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment it started, but little things began to feel off. Michelle started guarding her phone like it was a nuclear code. Her girls' nights became more frequent, and the intimacy in our marriage dwindled to almost nothing. Every time I brought it up, she brushed me off, saying I was paranoid and overthinking. At first, I tried to believe her. I wanted to believe her. But then, the distance between us grew, and so did my suspicions. I stopped kissing her goodbye when I left for work, and our conversations became mechanical, limited to logistics and necessities. It was like living with a stranger. I wasn't ready to accuse her without proof, though. Late one night, as she slept, I decided to check her phone. Nothing. Her laptop, still nothing. For a second, I thought I was losing my mind. Then, on a whim, I checked her car. What I found changed everything. Hidden under the passenger seat was a second phone. A phone I never even knew existed. And the moment I unlocked it, my world collapsed. The second I unlocked that phone, I felt my stomach drop. There were barely any contacts saved on it. Just one. And the messages, God, the messages. Explicit photos, suggestive texts, and long conversations about the fun they'd had while I was at work. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the messages, each one worse than the last. The sender was saved as J. My heart raced as I connected the dots. J was Jacob, a so-called friend of mine, someone I knew through mutual gatherings. We weren't best buddies, but we'd shared beers at barbecues and small talk at parties. And this guy had been sneaking around with my wife. I wasn't going to confront her without having everything lined up. I copied every text, every image, and every piece of damning evidence from that second phone onto my computer and printed it all out. A thick stack of paper sat on my desk, screaming the truth at me. I wanted to march into the bedroom, wake her up, and throw the evidence in her face. But I held back. I needed a plan. I spent hours in my home office, glaring at the walls and researching divorce lawyers. It was a Saturday, so I couldn't immediately consult anyone. But I emailed a lawyer I found who specialized in cases like mine. The fact that I lived in an at-fault state gave me a sliver of hope. At least Michelle wouldn't walk away with half of everything I'd worked so hard for. But I wasn't done. I needed to know more about Jacob, so I typed his number into my phone, pretending to call him as if I were a cable company rep. When his contact name popped up, confirming it was him, I snapped. I screamed into the void of my office, every curse word I knew spilling out of me. Michelle must have heard, because she cracked the door open, asking if I was okay. "Get the F*** out," I barked, my voice sharper than I'd ever let it be with her. She blinked in shock, stammering something before retreating back to the bedroom. I slammed the door shut and stood there, shaking. I had never raised my voice at her before, never cursed at her. And yet, after what I'd seen, I felt like it wasn't enough. I couldn't stay cooped up in the house. I called my best friend, Trevor, and asked if he'd meet me at a bar. He could tell something was wrong from the tone of my voice, but I didn't say much over the phone. just that I needed a drink and his company. When I arrived at the bar, I downed 4 shots of Jack Daniels before Trevor even showed up. The alcohol barely dulled the storm raging inside me. When he finally got there, he looked concerned and asked what was going on. I didn't sugarcoat it. "Michelle's cheating on me," I said bluntly. Trevor's face fell, and he immediately started apologizing. "Want to know who it's with?" I asked, the venom dripping from my words. He hesitated, but I didn't wait for a reply. "It's Jacob." The realization hit him hard. Trevor was the one who introduced me to Jacob in the first place, and now he looked like he wanted to punch something. "I'm so sorry, man," he said over and over, as if it would fix anything. We spent the night drinking and venting. I made him swear not to tell anyone, not even his wife, who was close to Michelle. I wasn't ready for this to become public knowledge. Not until I had the divorce papers ready to serve. Trevor promised to keep quiet, and I clung to that promise like a lifeline. By the time I got home at 3 a.m., Michelle was asleep on the couch, her phone clutched in her hand. I walked past her without a word and went straight to bed. My mind was still racing, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't look at her the same way again. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow, like my body was functioning on autopilot, while my mind churned through the events of the previous day. Michelle was next to me in bed, her face peaceful in sleep, as if she hadn't been busy tearing apart my life behind my back. I couldn't stand the sight of her. I quietly got dressed and left the house without waking her. My first stop was to pick up my car from the bar. The second was my office, where I drowned myself in work, anything to keep my thoughts from spiraling. I avoided my phone the entire day, not wanting to deal with her inevitable questions. When I finally checked it around 8 p.m., there were dozens of missed calls and texts from Michelle. "Where are you? Are you okay? Nick, talk to me. Please come home. I'm worried." The audacity of her acting worried about me made my blood boil. Still, I stayed silent. When I got home around 10 p.m., she was waiting for me at the door. I wasn't expecting her to greet me like this, not after years of her barely noticing when I came and went. She told me she had made dinner for us and asked if I wanted her to heat it up. I muttered a no and brushed past her, heading straight to bed. Moments later, she followed me. "What's going on with you?" she asked, her voice full of faux concern. "You've been so distant lately, and I don't understand why." I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay calm. "Just leave me alone, Michelle. I'm tired." "But I'm your wife," she pressed, her voice climbing higher. "If something's wrong, you need to tell me." That's when I snapped. "Michelle, stop. I'm trying to sleep. Go away." She flinched like I'd struck her, and for a moment, the room fell into a tense silence. Then she left, slamming the door behind her. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me. Not anymore. The next morning, I got an email from the lawyer confirming a meeting later that day. I quickly replied and began counting down the hours. Michelle tried to make breakfast and sat me down to talk. I played along, but her words were a blur. She went on about how I'd been acting different, how I was making her feel unwanted and ignored. I wanted to laugh in her face. Instead, I gave her the excuse of work stress and brushed her off, eager to get out of the house. I made sure to leave early for my meeting with the lawyer, telling my assistant to cover for me if Michelle called. The meeting was productive. I handed over all the evidence I'd gathered, and the lawyer confirmed that in our at-fault state, Michelle wouldn't be entitled to much. That was a small win, but it didn't feel like enough. I wanted her to know that I knew. I wanted her to feel the shame, the guilt, if she was even capable of it. As I left the lawyer's office, I made a decision. It was time to confront her. No more waiting, no more playing nice. When I got home, Michelle wasn't there. I called her twice, no answer. Then I texted her. "I don't give a f*** if you're with Jacob right now. Get home. We need to talk." Not even a minute later, she called back, her voice frantic. "Nick, what are you talking about? I'm not with Jacob. What's going on?" I didn't bother explaining. "Get home. Now." Michelle burst through the door about 15 minutes later, her face a mixture of confusion and annoyance. I was sitting at the dining table, the stack of evidence in front of me like a loaded weapon. She froze when she saw me, her eyes darting to the papers. I could see the wheels turning in her head, but she still played dumb. "What's this about, Nick?" she asked, her tone sharp, almost accusatory, like she was the one who had been wronged. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable. Finally, I said, 15 minutes. That's about the same time it takes to get here from Jacob's place. Isn't it? Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice losing its edge. I grabbed the stack of papers and held them up, fanning through the damning evidence. This is what I'm talking about. Your second phone, the texts, the pictures, all the crap you've been hiding from me while you were screwing around behind my back. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting around like she was searching for an escape. "Nick, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you dare lie to me." I slammed my fist on the table, making her jump. "Don't insult my intelligence, Michelle. I have everything right here." Her defenses crumbled, and the tears started. At first, they seemed genuine until the excuses and deflections poured out. "It's not what it looks like. Jacob and we were just talking. I felt lonely because you've been so distant." And I cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Lonely? Lonely? That's your excuse for sneaking around with one of my so-called friends? You felt lonely while I was working my ass off to give us a good life." She tried to approach me, her hands outstretched like she was going to comfort me. I recoiled, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't touch me." Her demeanor shifted, almost instantly. The tears dried up, replaced by anger. "Well, maybe if you hadn't been so cold and distant, I wouldn't have felt the need to find someone who actually gave a damn about me." I laughed again, a hollow, bitter sound. "Unbelievable. You cheat on me and now it's my fault? You're pathetic, Michelle." She sneered at me, her true colors showing through. "Oh, get off your high horse, Nick. You're not some perfect husband. You've been moody and impossible to talk to for months. What was I supposed to do? Not cheat?" I shot back, my voice deadly calm. "That would have been a good start." I picked up the stack of evidence and flipped through it, page by page, shoving each one in her face. "Here's you telling Jacob how much you missed him. Here's you sending him pictures I don't even recognize. Here's you meeting him while I was at work, while I was here, thinking we had a future together." Her bravado cracked. She started crying again, this time throwing herself into a pathetic heap on the floor. "I'm so sorry, Nick. I messed up. Please, I'll do anything to fix this. I love you. I do." "Save it," I said, my voice ice cold. "You didn't love me when you were meeting him at his place. You didn't love me when you were sending him those pictures. You didn't love me when you lied to my face every time I asked you what was going on. Don't pretend now." She crawled toward me, reaching for my hand. "We can work through this. Please just give me a chance. I'll block him, I'll never talk to him again. I'll do whatever you want." I stood, towering over her as she groveled on the floor. "The only thing I want is for you to get out of my house. Pack your things and leave. Now." Her eyes widened. "Nick, no. Please. This is our home. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," I snapped. "You can stay with Jacob for all I care. You clearly didn't think about where this would lead when you started sneaking around. So figure it out. You have 1 hour." Michelle stared at me, her face crumpling with disbelief and desperation. She sat frozen on the floor, her hands trembling as they clutched the edge of the table for support. When she realized I wasn't bluffing, her tone shifted again. This time, it was rage. "You're going to throw me out? Just like that? After everything we've been through?" Her voice was venomous now, the tears drying up as quickly as they had come. "After everything we've been through?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "Michelle, there is no we. You killed, The moment you decided to sneak around with Jacob. She shot up from the floor, her face twisted in anger. Oh, get over yourself, Nick. You're acting like some saint. Do you think you're perfect? You're boring, you're predictable, and honestly, I needed more than this dull life you've made for us. If you weren't so wrapped up in your stupid work all the time, maybe I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. I let her rant, each word cutting deeper, but it only fueled my resolve. I crossed my arms and leaned against the table, watching as she dug her own grave. Go on, I said coldly. Say everything you've been holding back. I want to hear it all. She glared at me, her chest heaving. You don't even know how to have fun anymore. All you care about is your stupid spreadsheets and paying bills on time. Jacob made me feel alive, okay? He made me feel wanted. You're so damn predictable it's suffocating. I let her words hang in the air, refusing to react. Instead, I reached for the stack of evidence, thumbing through it again. I pulled out one of the explicit photos she'd sent Jacob, slid it across the table and said, "Did you feel alive when you sent this to him? Or was that just another day of making me look like an idiot?" She recoiled, her bravado faltering as she glanced at the image. "I said I'm sorry," she screamed. "I told you I'll fix it. What more do you want from me?" "I already told you what I want," I said firmly. "Your bags. Packed. Now." Her voice cracked. "You can't just kick me out, Nick. This is my home too." I pulled out my trump card. The one thing that gave me peace in this chaos. Actually, it's not. You see, I spoke to a lawyer today, and thanks to your little escapades, you don't have much claim on anything. We live in an at-fault state, Michelle. You cheated. That means you're leaving with what you came in with, nothing. Her face turned ghostly pale, her anger evaporating in an instant. Wait, what? Nick, you can't do this. I'll be ruined. I don't have anywhere to go. You can't just... Oh, I absolutely can. I cut her off, enjoying the rare moment of power. You should have thought about the consequences before you started lying, before you started sneaking around, and before you brought Jacob into my life like some disgusting little parasite. Pack your things. Michelle collapsed back into the chair, silent for the first time since she'd walked in. I stared at her, daring her to argue, but she just sat there, defeated. Then, with a sudden burst of fake sincerity, she tried one last time. "Nick, please," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake, but I love you. I swear I do. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. I'll be the wife you deserve. I promise." I stared at her for a long moment before replying, my voice cold and final. "No, Michelle. You're not the wife I deserve. You're not even close." Michelle sat there in stunned silence, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words to manipulate her way out of this mess. Her usual arsenal of tears, anger, and guilt-tripping had failed her, and now she looked like a cornered animal. I was done giving her chances. "You have 1 hour, Michelle," I said coldly, standing up and heading toward the living room. "Pack what you need and leave. The rest can be arranged later. Don't test me." Her voice followed me, shrill and panicked. "Where am I supposed to go, Nick? To Jacob's? Is that what you want?" I turned on my heel, glaring at her. "I don't care where you go. Go to Jacob's. Go to a hotel. Hell, sleep in your car if you have to. Just get out of my house." Her face twisted in anger again. "You're a cruel, heartless bastard. You know that? After everything we've built together, you're just throwing me out like trash." I laughed bitterly. "Like trash? Michelle, you are trash. You trashed our marriage, you trashed my trust, and you trashed any chance of me ever respecting you again. If you think I'm being heartless, maybe you should take a long, hard look in the mirror." For a moment, it seemed like she was going to lash out at me physically, but she stopped herself, instead storming toward the bedroom. I heard drawers slamming and the rustling of clothes being stuffed into a bag. I stayed in the living room, counting down the minutes. While I waited, I texted Trevor. She's packing her things. I'm done." "Trevor, good for you, man. Do you need anything?" Just someone to grab a drink with later. I don't want to be here when she leaves. Trevor. Say the word. I felt a small pang of guilt for not feeling sadder about this. Michelle was my wife. I had loved her once, deeply. But as I sat there, listening to her stomp around the bedroom, all I felt was relief that this nightmare was almost over. She emerged 20 minutes later with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her face flushed with anger. Fine. I'm leaving, she spat. But don't think for a second that this is over. You'll regret this, Nick. You'll see. I stood and opened the door for her, gesturing for her to leave. Goodbye, Michelle. Don't come back. She hesitated for a moment, as if expecting me to stop her. When I didn't, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I stayed in the living room for a while, just staring at the door. It felt surreal that it was finally done, but I knew the real work was just beginning. The legal process, the paperwork, the explanations to family and friends, it all loomed ahead of me like a mountain to climb. But for now, I let myself sit in the silence, savoring the calm after the storm. The silence in the house felt deafening after Michelle left. For years, her presence had been a constant. Her laughter, her voice, even her arguments. Now all that was gone, replaced by the echo of my own thoughts. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the stack of evidence on the coffee table. Relief mingled with a strange emptiness. She was out of my life, but what now? I grabbed my phone and texted Trevor. She's gone. Where should we meet? Trevor. I'm at Mason's pub. Come by whenever. First round's on me. The thought of sitting in an empty house, reliving every word of our confrontation, was unbearable. I grabbed my coat and headed out. Mason's pub was only a short drive away, and the familiar atmosphere of clinking glasses and low chatter felt like a balm to my frayed nerves. Trevor was already there, a pint of beer waiting for me. You look like hell, he said, sliding the glass across the table. Feels about right, I muttered, taking a long drink. Trevor didn't push me to talk right away, letting the silence between us settle. When I was ready, I told him everything, about the second phone, the texts, the photos, the confrontation, and how I'd kicked her out. He listened, his expression a mix of sympathy and anger. You did the right thing, man, he said firmly. She didn't deserve you, and she sure as hell doesn't deserve to stay in your life after what she did. I nodded, though the words didn't bring the comfort I thought they would. It's just, I don't know what to do now. I feel like my whole life just got flipped upside down. Trevor leaned forward, his expression serious. You rebuild. You take it one step at a time. And you don't let her, or Jacob, drag you down any further. When I got home later that night, the emptiness hit me harder. Her side of the bed was bare, her belongings already gone from the dresser. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over. The next morning, I called the lawyer to update him on the situation. He assured me that the process would move quickly, given the evidence I had and Michelle's infidelity. He also warned me that she might try to make things difficult, but I was prepared for that. Sure enough, the messages started pouring in later that day. Michelle, I can't believe you did this. Michelle, you've ruined my life. Michelle, I hope you're happy. Michelle, can we at least talk? I didn't respond. Every message was an attempt to manipulate me, to reel me back in. She even tried calling a few times, but I let the calls go to voicemail. The desperation in her voice was palpable, but I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. By the end of the week, I had started to find some semblance of normalcy. Work kept me busy, and I leaned on Trevor and a few other close friends for support. I hadn't told my family yet. I wasn't ready to face their questions and judgment, but I knew that day would come soon. Then, just when I thought the worst was over, a text from an unknown number shook me to my core. Unknown. You think you've won? Watch your back. The text caught me off guard. my blood running cold as I read it again. You think you've won? Watch your back. I stared at my phone, debating whether to respond. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was. Jacob. The smug bastard must have caught wind of what had happened, probably from Michelle. My fingers hovered over the screen as anger surged through me. I wanted to call him, to demand answers, but I knew better than to stoop to his level. Instead, I saved the number and forwarded the text to my lawyer with a simple message. This just came in. Add it to the file. The reply came quickly. Got it. If this escalates, contact the authorities immediately. Stay safe. The logical part of me knew it was an empty threat, a pathetic attempt to scare me. But the emotional part couldn't help but replay every scenario where Jacob might actually try something. He wasn't exactly a close friend, but he'd been around enough to know details about my life, where I lived, my routine, even some of my habits. I called Trevor. Jacob just sent me a threat, I said as soon as he answered. What? Are you serious? Trevor's voice was sharp, concern laced in every word. Dead serious. He said, watch your back. Man, that's low even for him. You need to be careful. Lock your doors. Maybe set up some cameras if you haven't already. Yeah, I muttered, already pacing the room. I'll take care of it. That evening, I found myself checking every window and door in the house. I'd never felt unsafe in my own home before, but now, every creak and shadow set me on edge. I ordered a security camera system online, scheduled to arrive the next day, and made a mental note to call the police if anything more came up. Then came the calls. The first was from Michelle, her voice a mix of desperation and anger. Nick, what did you tell Jacob? He's furious. And now he's dragging me into this mess. I stayed silent, letting her rant. I don't know what you're trying to prove, she continued. But this isn't going to fix anything. You're just making it worse for everyone. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm and deliberate. Michelle, I don't care about your problems. I don't care about Jacob. You made your bed. Now lie in it. I hung up before she could respond, blocking her number immediately after. The next day, I received another text from Jacob. You're pathetic, man. Can't even keep your wife happy. Don't think this is over. This time, I didn't bother debating. I called the police, filed a harassment report, and handed over the text to the officer who came to my house. They assured me they'd reach out to Jacob and make it clear that any further contact would have legal consequences. It wasn't much, but it was a step in the right direction. That night, I sat in my quiet house, sipping a beer and staring at the security camera feed on my phone. The weight of everything was starting to settle. Michelle was gone, Jacob was officially a problem for the authorities, and I was on my way to rebuilding my life. But the emotional scars were fresh, raw. The betrayal, the anger, the humiliation. It all still lingered, like a bad taste I couldn't get rid of. I didn't regret kicking Michelle out or filing for divorce. But I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. What I hadn't expected was how much strength I'd already found in myself. The days that followed were a blur of meetings with my lawyer, late nights at the office, and cautious glances at my phone. The police had reached out to Jacob and the harassment stopped, for now. Michelle's silence was almost deafening. She hadn't tried to contact me again, likely realizing I was done being her safety net. For the first time in years, I was learning to exist without her shadow looming over me. One afternoon, my lawyer called with an update. Nick, I've reviewed everything you submitted. Given the evidence, this case is as straightforward as it gets. Michelle has no leverage here, and with the infidelity documented, you'll retain most of your assets. We're just waiting for her to respond to the papers. Do you think she'll contest it? I asked, already bracing for the worst. She might try to delay things or push for some concessions, but she doesn't have a strong position. Just stay the course. A week later, Michelle finally broke her silence. Not through a call or text, but via her lawyer who contacted mine. She wasn't contesting the divorce but wanted to negotiate the timeline for moving her remaining belongings out of the house. It was a small concession I was willing to make, mostly to avoid her dragging things out further. When she came to collect her things, I made sure not to be there. Instead, I watched the security camera feed from my office. She arrived with a friend, a woman I didn't recognize, and took her things without incident. There was no screaming, no theatrics, just a quiet, uneventful end to what had once been a love story I thought would last forever. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. The house felt emptier but freer, like a weight had been lifted from the air. I threw myself into work, leaned on Trevor for support, and even started picking up old hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage. Cooking, cycling, and playing guitar slowly became my therapy. Michelle's betrayal had gutted me, but it had also taught me a painful yet valuable lesson. Never ignore the red flags. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it can never truly be repaired. Looking back, there were warning signs I chose to ignore. The guarded phone, the distant behavior, the constant deflections when I tried to address our issues. It was all there, but I wanted so badly to believe in the woman I married. Love had blinded me to the truth, but it had also made me stronger in the end. If I could offer any advice to someone in a similar situation, it would be this: trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let someone gaslight you into doubting yourself. And above all, know your worth. You don't have to tolerate betrayal or disrespect, no matter how much you love someone. As for me, I'm moving forward. Slowly but surely, I'm rebuilding the life Michelle tried to tear apart. And for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. I don't know what it holds, but one thing is certain: I'll never settle for less than I deserve again.